Our next speaker is SAIRA HUSSAIN. SAIRA is a staff attorney at EFF, working on civil liberties team focusing on racial justice and surveillance. SAIRA was previously staff attorney in criminal justice reform program at Advancing Justice for Asian Law Caucus. And she has been working on federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement programs and advocacy and litigation, as well as coalition building. SAIRA, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Vahid, for that introduction. And thank you to Ethics in Tech for allowing us this platform. I'm really excited to talk with you all today about an insight into what accountability of government surveillance could look like. And the case example that I want to present to you is, as Nash and Brett have mentioned, our lawsuit that we filed last October against the city of San Francisco for spying on protesters who were in part of the Black-led protests against police violence. So to take you back to last year, on May 25th, we all watched in horror as George Floyd was murdered by law enforcement. And very soon thereafter, protests began across the country, and they spread from Minneapolis to all over, including in San Francisco. And once these protests began happening, we at EFF knew that there was going to be some surveillance, not just some surveillance, a lot of surveillance of those protesters. And what we wanted to do was make sure that government was going to be held accountable when they use surveillance technologies against protesters. So very soon after the protests began, they began at the end of May into early June. And somewhere in the middle of the summer, around June or July, we decided to start sending in public records requests to find out what types of surveillance technologies were being used, particularly by law enforcement. Here in San Francisco, we ended up sending public records requests to find out the types of surveillance technologies being used, and with an eye in particular towards one sort of entity, and that is known as a business improvement district. So these are quasi-government entities. They're usually formed by taxpayers in a certain part of the community that come together, and they decide to pay an additional tax in order to supplement city services, do things sometimes like provide surveillance cameras, and they're known as business improvement districts or community benefit districts. And here in San Francisco, there are 18 of them. We have known about business improvement districts and the ways in which they sometimes work with law enforcement. And so we wondered, because a lot of the protests went through parts of the city where these business improvement districts are active, what types of information were collected by these business improvement districts, and what type of information flowed over to the police. So we know that there are several of these districts with camera networks here in San Francisco. And they're just networks of surveillance cameras, and they capture all kinds of information. Now, normally what happens is, let's say the police find out that, somebody has said, like, I'm a victim of a crime, or a business has said, I need to go, get an insurance claim. What'll happen is the person who wants the footage or the police will put in a request, and they'll ask for a specific time, location, that sort of thing. And the folks at the back end in the business improvement district will take a look, and they'll say, okay, well, it pertains to this particular camera, and they'll provide them with that snippet of footage. So we wanted to find out what type of information the police got. So we sent in these requests to the Union Square Business Improvement District and asked them, what type of requests have you received with regard to these protests? And what we found out was that the Union Square Business Improvement District got a number of requests during the time of the protests. And in particular, from May 30th through 31st, they got a request from the police department for a 12-hour data dump of all 400 of their cameras in network. which means that they were trying to, it was not related to a particular incident. It was just 12 hours of historical footage. On top of that, we found out that the Union Square Business Improvement District received a request for and provided access to 7 days of live remote footage to the San Francisco Police Department. And the way that the police department put it was, we need to find out what's happening with situational awareness with the demonstrations that are coming through our areas, and so provide us with access. And we saw this chain of emails going back and forth from the Business Improvement District to the police department, where they're saying, give us this link, and the Business Improvement District says, sure, we'll provide you with remote access. And then on top of that, there was a request for an extension, and the Business Improvement District also granted that. Now, what does this mean? It means that essentially people who were participating in these protests were under surveillance. They, if they walk through the Union Square area during the time of these protests, they could have been caught on camera exercising their First Amendment rights to speak out against police violence, in particular against the Black community. So after this came out, we decided that we had to make this public. We wanted to let the public know about what the police were doing. And so we published a blog post providing this information. And it was something that the public hadn't previously known, and we found out about through these public records requests. So we had this information, we made it public, and we started to think about what else we could do. And going back to what Nash said about San Francisco's CCOPS ordinance, San Francisco passed in June 2019 the surveillance technology ordinance, which prohibits acquisition, borrowing, or use by the government of surveillance technology without prior approval from the Board of Supervisors. And as Nash also mentioned, the way that we try to make sure these ordinances have teeth is by putting in a private right of action. And so this private right of action has had injunctive relief, which allows for private people to bring this lawsuit and enforce this ordinance when the government violates it. So we spoke with many people, and we found some amazing activists, including Nash, including Hope Williams, as Brett mentioned. And these are people who are on the front lines of this fight against police violence and for racial justice, right? These are people who are taking part in and organizing this incredible social movement for equality and for justice. And when the police are using this sort of surveillance technology against people, it makes it so that it chills free speech. It makes it very hard for people to associate, because once people know that the police are going to be watching in a number of different ways, it makes it that much harder for people to come out into the street and raise their voice. It makes it that much harder for people who are organizing to bring those people out. And it seriously hampers movements like Black Lives Matter. So we decided to file suit on behalf of this incredible group of protesters back in October 2020. And so we sued the city of San Francisco. EFF brought the lawsuit along with the ACLU of Northern California. And one thing that I really love about this is that both of our organizations and many others throughout the city of San Francisco, as well as individuals, helped pass the surveillance technology ordinance. We identified when it was violated, and then we brought the lawsuit. So that is, it's exactly the model you want to see. From the ground up, that's what we did. We believe that this is the first enforcement of a CCOPS ordinance in the country. And so it is exciting to see the power of the community in order to enforce the laws that they help pass. So we have, like I mentioned, filed this lawsuit. We're currently in the middle of it right now. And we are hopeful that what'll come of this is accountability, making sure that the government knows they can't just do whatever they want. They can't just start using whatever technology is available to them and expect that they're able to do it so blatantly, such a blatant violation, even after the community raises their voices and says, no, actually, we want some control over how the police are going to be surveilling us. We want some say in this. So we're really excited to have been able to bring this lawsuit, and we'll be sure to keep you all updated about how it goes. And we're also hopeful that this lawsuit helps set the model for people across the country. You know, all these jurisdictions that are passing CCOPS ordinances, face recognition bans, we really want to see these pass across the country. And on top of that, when there are violations, know that there are people out there who can help bring them. And we're hopeful that we can help move that along through this lawsuit.